Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. I've been following the COVID-19 pandemic for a while, since early 2020, primarily focused on autoimmunity, as I predicted with our research team that this is a viral mediated autoimmune disease. It's important because if you understand it, you'll realize why immune suppression works so well in severe COVID-19, that steroids and the like. But today I'm asking an important question. And let me be clear, there are no easy answers here. And the answers may not be what you think. And so, from a scientific point of view, always be open to all options. But the question is, what happens when the vaccine antibodies fall? What is the impact across the population? Now, I'm going to be looking at the information from the Office of National Statistics in the UK, looking at antibody levels. That was from March because it's no longer being updated. And I'll be making reference to the normal antibody levels that occur after infection in the typical unvaccinated person, and this is just looking at the statistics from England at that time. And I'll be trying to see if I can correlate it with a few slides to help you explain what I'm thinking about. So, the first thing you have to understand is that in the context of a normal infection, this is what tends to happen. And so this is outside of vaccination. And this is just a look at the general antibody levels after someone had been infected. And you can see the timeline here. And on average, you can see all these spots are people's antibody levels. On average, it's just a little below 300 nanograms per mil. And you can see that this is about where it lies normally. And one of the things that we have been concerned about from a scientific point of view is that after vaccination, you had significant rises in antibody levels, which I'm going to come to in a second. But critically, what I've been focused on, and I did a presentation on this, is the danger of IgG4, because this was not supposed to happen. And I'll explain what IgG4 is in just a few minutes. So let's just start with some basic information, and I'll take you through a few slides so that you understand the science as to what I think is going on at the moment. So I'm just going to show you a few slides here. So, in the context of infection, your body will produce immunoglobulins. And these are like long distance weapons. They shoot at a distance and they attack things, they stick to it, and then they cause the immune system to respond. And there are lots of types of antibodies. There's the IgGM. This is the first one to be produced in a new infection, which then oftentimes become IgG long-term antibodies. IgA tends to occur primarily in secretions. It can be in the bloodstream as well. And IgE is the allergic type antibody that triggers like anaphylaxis. Now, in the context of IgG, this is the long term antibody. And when we speak about vaccination or repeated infection, it's usually IgG that's produced. And what you can see here is that you have four different types of IgG: one, two, three, and four. I've circled this number four here because the IgG4 here is very important. And there's an unusual pattern that is occurring in the context of mRNA vaccination, particularly, that doesn't happen in a normal infection. When we look at what happens with IgG4, you have to remember that these two, the IgG1 and IgG3, tend to trigger the inflammatory process in the body. So they're like the guys that set off the alarms and cause the immune system to respond strongly. IgG4, on the other hand, is trying to dampen down the immune system. It's like a tolerant antibody. So, as I've always said, the beekeepers tend to have high levels of IgG4 because they are continuously being stung by bees, and rather than the immune system continually responding to it, you have high levels of IgG4 to counter it. So that's the typical situation that you have in the body. And there is a reason now why this is so important in the context of mRNA vaccination, which tends to be the primary one. So you'll understand why I'm asking this question if I'm talking about a tolerant antibody. And so, in the context of the mRNA vaccines, a really strange thing was found. And this was found a few years ago. So, this was easily from 2022 when this first came out. So, this was a big study. And what they found after the third dose of the vaccine was a 38.6 times rise in IgG4. And so this was really, really strange. It's almost a 4,000% increase of IgG4 after vaccination. And it seems that with the high levels of spike protein, you then had a situation where the body, instead of trying to destroy the spike protein, started to become tolerant to it. I don't think this was what was expected. So don't let anybody tell you this is a good thing. This was not anticipated. Nobody knew this was going to happen. Now you can argue if it's a serious thing or not, but it definitely was not anticipated. And truthfully, I don't think we would have wanted that to happen because you want the immune system to continue to work. So this is what I suspect it looks like is now you have IgG4 here binding to the spike protein. But what then happens is that it's not triggering the immune system to therefore pick up the virus. It's just interfering with the ability of the virus to be able to get into cells. So that has some advantages. But for the viruses that do get into the cells, it doesn't seem to be able to be blocking them from replicating. And we found that in the context of uh, autopsies in vaccinated cohorts, there was high levels of viral dissemination. But I'm going to show you, before I show you that, I'll show you again another paper that was again, and this one was in 2023, which was showing the class switch towards spike protein IgG4 antibodies after mRNA vaccination. And the IgG4 percentage is in yellow here. IgG1 is in blue. Those are the two that I want you to concentrate on. And if somebody had infection first, you can see the majority of it is blue. And there's a small amount of yellow. So it does occur in any case, even if you had infection and then vaccination, you still have this occurring. In the context of somebody who was vaccinated and then had infection, you're talking about 41% of the antibodies are now IgG4. And if they had no infection, it's 45% that are IgG4. So this is really not what is typical. And if you look at the comparison here, this would be more likely to show you a normal infection. And you can see there's barely any yellow in here. It is just a tiny fraction of IgG4 that occurs. So this pattern is really unusual. And we don't yet know the implications. So I can't tell you that this is absolutely a bad thing, but it's unexpected and it's something we have to think about the implications of. And this is what I'm trying to process as I'm taking you through my thought patterns. The main point is that you're likely to end up with viral dissemination. So that would mean that people are exposed to the virus, their immune system does a tolerant response to it, but the virus is still able to get to spread all around the body, brain, lungs, heart, liver. But there's high levels of IgG4, and so it's interfering with the viral ability to continue to replicate. But it's almost as if it's just sitting there. And this is kind of like what Gert was talking about, where he said it's almost as if the virus is just waiting for the opportunity to break free. And that's the question that I'm having in my mind is the tolerant antibodies then are suppressing the immune system. What happens when these tolerant antibodies fall? Now, it's not a question about some people. I tell you, you have to be so balanced in your thinking when you're looking at the science. So, this is not about whether or not someone is pro vaccine or anti vaccine. You just have to think about what are the implications. And for every intervention, there is a risk benefit analysis. And it almost looks as though if somebody is on that treadmill with high levels of IgG4, with high circulating virus, I don't know if they can come off. But on the other hand, if somebody isn't on that treadmill and has natural immunity, they shouldn't jump on the treadmill. It's that kind of question. And so it's important that if we see a change in disease presentation, because this is one of the worries I have, is that you're going to have, if more people start dying because vaccine uptake is so low, they're going to say it was because they didn't take the vaccine. Now, there is some truth in that, but you have to be nuanced in understanding exactly why that occurred. Because if they hadn't been on the treadmill in the first place, this wouldn't have happened. So that's the kind of question that I'm working through. So let's take you back to now the latest Office of National Statistics, which was in 2023 in March. And it's clear they are no longer updating this. And so it's a pity because this would have been extremely useful for us to be able to see what the trajectory is every 3 to 6 months in terms of the fall in antibody levels. But at that time, last year, you had technically levels looking something like this. And so they were looking at all age groups 16 to 24, 25 to 34. They broke it down. And the blue line is is highlighting that level, the minimum level of 179 nanograms per mil. Now, just remember, let me just get this back up. In normal infection, we said it's about 280. So their minimum is about here, running along this line. They want your antibody levels to be above that for them to perceive that you have protection. So coming back to this, what they had found is that across that population, up to 93% in this age group, 98% in the over 65s up to over 80s had antibody levels above that. So that's good. And the green line represents over 800 nanograms per mil. And that was considered to be the ceiling. Okay. Now, let's just think about this bit of information. Now, this is the bit that had concerned me before, and it's still concerning to me, but there seems to be low vaccine booster uptake, so it's going to be less of a concern, but there is still some relevance to the question. So here it is. That same data from the Office of National Statistics again broke this down according to age group, and critically, according to the amount of antibody that they had. Now, observe this carefully. This is the age group 16 to 24. What you have here is 0 at the bottom, and the lowest level, almost white here, is less than 179. So those people they would be concerned about don't have protective antibody levels. Just above is their target, 179 to 800 nanograms per mil. So you can see in this age group 16 to 24, it looks like about 30 to 40% have that level. Okay? Above that is now 800 to 2000. This blue here is 2000 to 4000. The slightly darker blue here is 4000 to 6000. And above that, this dark blue is above 6,000 nanograms per mil. You have to remember, as I said, in normal infection, the antibody level was primarily about 280. So we're talking about 20 to 30 times higher antibody levels, even in young patients. I was very concerned about that because the target should have been here. Why would you want people to go all the way up to here? It's never usually a good thing to do. But as you go down here and you looked at the over 80 age group, you can see here that almost 60% of them are above 6,000. And above 6,000 doesn't mean 6,500. It could be 10,000, 15,000. We don't know what level that is. Now, take into consideration what I had said before. The majority of these antibodies are likely to be IgG4, tolerant antibodies. And so, therefore, they are likely to be protective against severe disease. But as I said, you have a situation where they can't control the infection, and you have ongoing infection with high levels of the tolerant antibody. Then you would have a situation where the virus can spread, but can't actually yet cause any damage. So, this is the question: what happens when the IgG4 levels fall? When you already have viral dissemination, you no longer have tolerant antibodies. And based on Gert's prediction, actually the antibody trajectory with JN1 is no longer shifting to an antibody response, it's shifting to a cellular response. And so, are you then going to have a situation where you have a hyperimmune response starting to occur across the population because they no longer have IgG4? That's the question. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I'm trying to think about it from the perspective of, well, what do we do? Because what that means is, and I'll show you the picture again, just remember that in a significant, this is 45% of the antibodies are IgG4. As this falls down and you no longer have IgG4 and you have a cellular immune response targeting the virus, that's now when the immune system kicks in. Do we have a different kind of cytokine storm where it's not necessarily targeting the lungs? Could be the liver, the heart, the kidneys, the brain. How does that look? What kind of disease does that cause? This is where we really have to be thinking. We have to recognize where there are problems and anticipate the outcomes of these problems. Because now that we have people on the treadmill, I don't know if they can afford to come off the treadmill with high circulating levels of JN1. But if JN1 is in any case evading the antibody response, does it make sense to continue boosting those people who have already been boosted without knowing what the outcomes are? The information out of Austria didn't seem to show that further boosting helped, but we don't know. And what is concerning me is that we seem to be having a situation where public health doesn't know what the next step is. And I understand because I don't know either. But one thing is, you should be talking about it. We should be raising the question to let people know this could be a problem. How do we manage it if it starts to cause an inflammatory response going forward? Is it that you just keep on boosting people with antibodies to cause immune suppression? Why don't you just use an immunosuppressant in the first place, like hydroxychloroquine or low dose steroids or methotrexate? We have lots of options from an immune point of view, but it seems that there would have to be an acknowledgement that there was a mistake in the first place. It seems that at these days that leaders don't want to acknowledge mistakes, and sadly they would rather to leave the population's health to suffer. If that's the kind of leaders and leadership that we have across the world, then we really are in trouble and it's time to change them. But let's hope for the best. Let's keep thinking scientifically and prepare for the worst. Have a great evening.